I've been a pizza delivery driver for about 3 years now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and lets me meet some interesting people. Most nights, the orders are routine: college kids too lazy to cook, couples having a movie night, or families treating themselves. But every now and then, I get a delivery that sticks with me. There's one night in particular I'll never forget. It started like any other shift, busy, loud, and chaotic as the orders rolled in. I was halfway through my shift when the phone rang, and my manager took an order from a house on the edge of town. The address seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. It was way out near the woods, a good 15-minute drive from the pizzeria. Most of our deliveries were within a 5-mile radius, but this one was special. A $100 bill was promised as a tip if we delivered in under 30 minutes. The details of the call were odd. The customer's voice was soft, almost a whisper, and there was static in the background like they were on a bad line. They only ordered one large pizza with pepperoni, but they gave explicit instructions: no other toppings, no mistakes. Ring the doorbell twice, then leave the pizza on the doorstep and walk away. Do not wait for someone to answer. And don't look inside the house. The last part made me pause. Don't look inside the house? I repeated, half laughing. Just follow the instructions, the voice replied before the line went dead. I should have refused the order right then and there. But the promise of a $100 tip. I wasn't about to turn that down. The GPS took me down winding roads that seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. The further I drove, the fewer houses I saw, until finally, I was surrounded by dense woods. My headlights barely cut through the gloom, and the only sounds were the crunch of gravel beneath my tires and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. When I pulled up to the house, I immediately felt uneasy. It was an old 2-story structure with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. The porch light flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows across the yard. The place looked abandoned, but the driveway was clear of leaves and debris, as if someone had recently used it. I checked the order again, making sure I had the right address. I did. Against my better judgment, I grabbed the pizza and walked up to the door. I rang the doorbell twice, as instructed. The sound echoed through the house, but no one answered. I placed the pizza on the doorstep and turned to leave, but then I heard something, movement inside. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, though. It was more like shuffling, as if something heavy was being dragged across the floor. I froze, curiosity battling with fear. That's when I noticed it, the window to the left of the door. The curtains were slightly parted, and I could see a sliver of the living room beyond. Without thinking, I stepped closer and peered inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The living room was dimly lit by a single, swaying bulb. The furniture was old and mismatched, covered in plastic sheets. But what caught my attention was the figure in the center of the room. A man sitting in a wooden chair. His head was slumped forward, and his arms hung limply at his sides. At first, I thought he was asleep, but then I noticed the ropes binding him to the chair, digging into his wrists and ankles. His face was pale, and there was a dark stain spreading across the front of his shirt. Before I could process what I was seeing, the man's head snapped up, and his eyes locked onto mine. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the pizza. He was mouthing something, his lips moving rapidly, but no sound came out. I strained to read his lips. "Run!" The word sent a jolt of fear through me. I turned to sprint back to my car, but before I could take a step, the door creaked open behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding. A tall man stood in the doorway, his face hidden in the shadows. He wore a dark hoodie, and his hands were stuffed casually into his pockets, as if he hadn't just caught me spying. "Thanks for the pizza," he said, his voice calm and cold. I tried to play it cool, forcing a smile. "No problem. Enjoy your night." But as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. "You looked inside, didn't you?" he said, his grip tightening. "And no," I stammered, trying to pull away. He leaned closer, and for the first time, I saw his face. His eyes were dark and empty, like twin voids, and his smile was unnervingly wide. "You shouldn't have done that." I yanked my arm free and bolted for my car. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps pounding across the porch. I didn't dare look back. I jumped into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys as he closed in. Just as he reached the car, I managed to start the engine and slam the gas. The tires screeched as I sped down the driveway, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. I didn't stop driving until I reached the pizzeria. My hands were shaking as I parked and ran inside. My manager took one look at me and asked what was wrong, but I couldn't find the words to explain. Instead, I went to the back and pulled up the order history to confirm the address. But when I entered it into Google Maps, something strange happened. The location didn't exist. The pin dropped in the middle of a wooded area with no roads or buildings nearby. Confused, I called the number from the order. It went straight to voicemail. The message was simple: this number is no longer in service. I quit the job a week later. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every time I walked to my car, I felt eyes on me. Every knock at the door made my heart race. Then, one night, I found a pizza box on my doorstep. It was the same box I'd delivered to that house, but the lid had been slashed with deep, jagged cuts. Inside was a single piece of paper. It read, "Next time, don't look." I moved to a different town, far away from that house, but the nightmares never stopped. Sometimes, I still hear the man's voice in my dreams, whispering the same chilling phrase, "You shouldn't have done that." And every so often, when I least expect it, I find a pizza box waiting for me. It's always empty, except for that same note. I know it's only a matter of time before he finds me again. And this time, I don't think I'll be able to escape. I've been delivering pizzas for about 6 months now. It's an easy gig, and the tips are decent. Most nights, it's a breeze. Drop off a pizza, pocket some cash, repeat. But every once in a while, I get a delivery that makes me rethink the job. This story? It's the one that still keeps me up at night. It started on a cold, rainy Friday night. Orders were flying in, and I was barely keeping up. Around 9 p.m., my manager handed me a slip with an address on it. "This one's out in the sticks," he said. "Big tip if you're quick." The address was on the outskirts of town, near an area I didn't recognize. I glanced at the slip. It had the usual details. One large pepperoni pizza, no special instructions. Easy enough, or so I thought. The rain was coming down hard as I drove out of town. My GPS led me down a narrow, winding road surrounded by trees. The further I went, the fewer streetlights there were. Soon, I was driving through pitch-black woods, the only light coming from my headlights. After about 20 minutes, the GPS announced I'd reached my destination. I slowed down, squinting through the rain. On my left was a gravel driveway leading to a small house. It was old and run down, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. The porch light was on, but the windows were dark. I pulled up and parked. Grabbing the pizza, I stepped out of the car, shivering as the rain soaked through my jacket. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But I brushed it off as nerves and headed for the porch. I knocked on the door and waited. Nothing. After a few seconds, I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I leaned in and called out, "Pizza delivery." That's when I heard it, a faint sound coming from inside the house. It was soft and rhythmic, almost like a tapping. I couldn't tell if it was coming from footsteps, dripping water, or something else entirely. I glanced back at my car, debating whether to just leave the pizza on the porch and go. But then I noticed something. The front door wasn't fully closed. It was cracked open, just enough to see a sliver of the dark interior. "Hello?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your pizza's here." For a moment, there was silence. Then, from somewhere inside the house, I heard a voice. "Come in." It was low and raspy, barely louder than a whisper. My stomach tightened. Every instinct told me to leave, but part of me thought maybe someone was hurt or unable to get to the door. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was faint but sharp, like something metallic mixed with mildew. The air was damp, and the walls were lined with old, peeling wallpaper. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting flickering light over the small living room. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. No response. The tapping sound was louder now, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. I set the pizza down on a small table near the door, hoping they'd find it and I could leave. But as I turned to go, the voice came again, louder and more insistent. "Come here." I froze. The voice was coming from down the hallway to my right. Against every instinct, I found myself moving toward it. My footsteps echoed on the creaking floorboards as I peered down the hall. At the end of the hallway, a door was slightly ajar. A dim, flickering light spilled out from the crack. The tapping sound was louder now, steady and relentless. My heart was pounding as I approached the door. "I'm just here to deliver the pizza," I said, my voice trembling. "If you don't need anything else, I'm gonna go." But the voice didn't answer. Instead, the tapping stopped. I reached the door and hesitated. Something inside me screamed to turn around and run, but my hand was already on the doorknob. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The room was small and empty, except for a single chair in the center. On the chair sat an old, boxy TV, its screen flickering with static. The tapping sound started again, but now I could see where it was coming from. The TV's screen had a crack running down the middle, and one of the broken edges was tapping against the glass. I stared at it, confused and unnerved. That's when the screen went black, and a single word appeared in bold, white letters. Run. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and bolted down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. But as I reached the living room, I froze. The front door, which I'd left open, was now shut. I lunged for the doorknob, yanking it open and stumbling onto the porch. The rain was still coming down in sheets, but I didn't care. I sprinted to my car, threw the door open, and jumped inside. As I fumbled with the keys, I glanced back at the house. Through the rain, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. They were tall and motionless, their face obscured by the shadows. The car roared to life, and I slammed on the gas, speeding down the gravel driveway and back onto the road. I didn't stop driving until I was back at the pizzeria. My manager looked up as I burst through the door, soaking wet and out of breath. "What the hell happened to you?" he asked. "That house," I said, my voice shaking. "Something's wrong with that house." He frowned and checked the order slip. "What house?" I grabbed the slip from him and pointed at the address. But when I looked at it again, the address was gone. The paper was blank, except for the time of the delivery. My blood ran cold. "You gave me this address," I insisted. "It was way out in the woods." He shook his head. "I didn't give you anything. You've been sitting here for the last half hour waiting for your next delivery." I went home that night, still rattled and unable to sleep. I told myself it was just exhaustion or a bad prank. But when I checked my phone the next morning, there was a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of the house, taken from the end of the driveway. Beneath it was a single word: "Thanks." I never delivered to the outskirts of town again. But sometimes late at night, I still hear that voice whispering in my head, "Come in."